All right, COVID conversation, number one. Well, hey everybody, we thought we would try something today that we have never done before. On a regular basis, Joe and I end up talking about questions of the day that end up being kind of a way of batting around the idea of where is God in all of this, and how do we understand what we're going through in light of the Christian faith. And so we thought we would record one of these conversations. It's a little bit scripted, but not completely. And Joe and I are here, and we are going to just ponder the fact that we're in the middle of this medical crisis in our world, and how do we understand that from the perspective of what God is doing and how God relates to it and us in this whole situation. And one of the challenges, Joe, that we have is that we know that God is in control of everything, right?
Yeah.
What does the Bible say about that? Is God really bringing this upon us on purpose, or what do you think?
Well, I mean, yeah, if you have a God who can do anything, then even when he is not doing something, in some sense he's doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
For God to actively do something is a decision that he makes to do, and for him to not do something is a decision he makes to do. And so at some level, everything that happens according to God's desire.
Yeah. Job had all kinds of terrible things happen to him, and he had the famous quote, "The Lord gives and the Lord taketh away, blessed be the name of the Lord." And so he really saw that God was in some sense doing this, even though we know that Satan was the one who was the immediate one who caused it to happen, yet God certainly was permitting it, that's for sure.
Yeah. God didn't personally kill Job's kids. It was a windstorm that knocked the house down, and it was blocks of stone and pieces of wood that killed his kids. And yet Job said, "The Lord gave and the Lord took away." And that's, and yet the text goes on to say, in all this, Job didn't sin with his lips or blame God, which I take to mean he didn't charge God with doing wrong. Mm. So when Job loses his flocks to thieves, the Lord took those away too, but God doesn't steal stuff.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting dilemma, isn't it? Trying to understand how God can be in control of things and yet not actually do those things himself. Mm-hmm. Isaiah 37:26, when he's talking about some connection with the king of Assyria, he makes a statement like this: I determined it long ago, God says. I planned it from days of old. And so, in some sense, they were living out what God had prepared for them to do, and yet these were the very things that they themselves chose to do. So, quite a mystery, God's control, even when things are going wrong.
Yeah, the king of Assyria was no picnic.
No.
He was a bad dude.
He was a bad guy.
Yeah.
And
And so how you make sense of a God who builds that sort of thing into the fabric of the universe is a hard thing to do. Mm-hmm. Because if you or I had the power to stop something so terrible, and we didn't, well, that'd make us look like kind of bad guys.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that's for sure. And that's been an accusation over the years, hasn't it? That if God is in control of everything, he must not be a good God because he lets all these things happen. Yeah. So,
yeah, for sure.
So if I'm thinking about the coronavirus. And I'm wondering, well, am I going to get this or not? On the one hand, I'm trying to do all I can not to get it. Social distancing and making sure I'm washing my hands and doing all the things that President Trump has asked me to do. And yet, Psalm 139, verse 16 says, talking about a person who was created in God's image, in thy book were written every one of them, the days that thou hast set before me. So, I don't know, in some sense, am I destined to get the coronavirus? And on the other hand, no, I'm trying not to, so those two things are going on. So tricky.
Yeah. I read a quote that was ascribed to Oliver Cromwell earlier today. It said, "Trust the Lord and keep your powder dry." I think that's right. Mm-hmm. Jesus said, nobody by worrying can add 1 hour to their life. Yeah. You can't worry yourself into a longer life. In some sense, you're invincible until your number's up. At the same time, if you step in front of a train, you're going to die. Yeah.
So don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. There's a call for wisdom.
Well, one of the things that helps me when I'm thinking about this is the fact that in this world, we are wrestling with what the Bible calls the curse that God placed upon this earth in response to the coming of sin into the world through our first parents, Adam and Eve. They sinned against God and in effect brought from God the curse, so that the ground was now going to be difficult to get a living out of, and Eve was going to have a hard time in childbirth, and the serpent is cursed, Satan is cursed, and so we're living now in a world that is very definitely under this curse in which things do not work right. When I think about Genesis, it's kind of interesting, those three pieces. The ground is cursed and childbirth is mentioned specifically, and then the curse on Satan himself. And I was thinking about that, and I almost wonder if that isn't a picture of the ground being cursed really refers to the whole physical universe. Sure. Being under the curse, so that nothing works right in this world. Things rust, things rot. It's hard to make things work right. Something's always going wrong. Things wear out. Everything, and that applies to Earth, and it applies to the moon. If you look at the moon, things haven't gone well there. And all over the place. And so, and then when I think about Eve and childbirth, I think about the fact that curse is passed on from parent to child. And I don't know if it's exactly right to think about it that way, but I do. And I think, the curse happens through birth. When I'm conceived, my parents were sinful, and so I'm sinful. We're all under the curse. And then when I think about Satan being cursed, I think about him, this spiritual warfare, this battle where Satan is seeking us to devour. And there's a real battle for our souls out there going on. And we need to do what we can do to win that battle and to come to Christ for salvation. So anyway, the curse definitely is operating with the coronavirus now.
Sure. Yeah, it plagues all of us. We are, what does the text says? It says, from dust we came, and to dust will return. So you curse the dust. Well, that's what we're made of. Yeah. And it's not like life was perfect until a coronavirus showed up. I mean, right. There's a million ways that we figure out how to get sick and die. Yeah,
I wrote recently, I think in one of the newsletters, that Every funeral I do is for a sinner, and the reason I know it's for a sinner is because they died. They died. If they had been in sin, they wouldn't have died, because death is a consequence of sin. So yeah, so it's not just the coronavirus, but all of our existence really that's tainted and touched by sin. But Jesus says, when we come to him for salvation, we're forgiven of our sins, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I don't have any sin upon me, shouldn't I get out of these consequences now?
Yes.
How does that
Yes. All in good time. All in good time.
All in good time.
Yeah, the theologians talk about the already and the not yet. So we're already forgiven. We're already, in some sense, free from the penalty of sin. But that final redemption is waiting. Yeah. And so we're still wrestling with sinful nature and doing sinful things. Yeah. And really, the coronavirus reminds us that there's a moral dimension to this world, because it was the abrogation of God's laws, the violation of God's laws, that brought this whole mess in. Mm-hmm. This is a good reminder that we're sinful, living in and this is what sin does. It wrecks stuff. Yeah. It rots it. It ruins it. And though we're forgiven, we're still, until finally glorified, after death, sinful. Yeah. So we all get to die, unless Jesus comes back. Yeah. That should be better.
I agree. I think that when I think about the forgiveness of sins, I think about the fact that we're forgiven of the guilt of our sin, but we know that we don't immediately get away from being sinful, Right. And it's as though God has ordained that every person is going to live in this world under the curse of sin, Christian or no. And so we experience these tough things, and yet God is at work, like you say, to bring about a day. I think God helps us to avoid some of the consequences of sin by helping us to repent when we come to him, and to be sanctified as we live in him, that is, to more and more turn away from our sin and so forth. So that helps us. If I will actually stop committing some sins, my life will actually improve, and be better. So there's a little bit of a relief there, but ultimately not until that great day.
Yeah, if you quit knocking off convenience stores, you don't spend time in jail, and your life is a little better.
Right.
Yeah,
your life will happen better. So even in that small way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think about Paul's statement in Romans 7 when he says, talking about the wrestling match that he has with sin, when he says, the good thing I want to do, I never do that. The bad thing I want to avoid, I end up doing that. I can't believe it. And he says, oh, what a wretched man that I am.
Yes.
Now, nobody likes to think of themselves as wretched, but sometimes we feel that way when we're struggling against sin, that's for sure. So
yeah, that's very honest.
Yeah, very honest.
And I appreciate it as much as I hate it. I'm glad he felt that way, because I do all the time.
I am so glad he put that in there. That's for sure. Because if Paul can feel that way, maybe I'm all right to feel that way a little bit. We're afraid of feeling wretched, aren't we, today?
Sure. Oh, good heavens, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we have specialists to fix us of wretchedness.
That's right.
Any problem that we have.
That's right. No low self-esteem for us.
That's right. Yeah.
But nevertheless, there is that side of it. We are gloriously built in God's image, but that image has been marred by sin, and the coronavirus is simply one more reminder that we're a long way from really totally being delivered from it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's good to be faced with our mortality sometimes and say, this could be the thing. Yeah. It could be. And because we have to be ready. Because if it's not this, it's going to be something. Yeah. And I mean, in some ways, we're in the death business, and nobody in this community probably deals with death more than you do and sees more of it than you do. I mean, you're like the funeral man. You're the first call. And, you know, it's your job to sometimes 25, 30 times a year stand over the body of somebody who's died and said, look, this is the end of all man.
Yeah, we're all going there. So
that's
for
right. So
sure.
be ready.
Yeah. So the coronavirus is part of the curse of sin upon this world, and God has permitted it for some reason unknown to us, perhaps. We can look and maybe imagine good things coming out of it even, or important things coming out of it, we should say. Mm-hmm. But in the end, as we said last week, we are His. We're in His hand, and He will deliver us one way or the other, you know, no matter if we live or if we die. So,
yeah, that's right. That's right. And God uses suffering for eternal good, and the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be revealed with the glory that's to come. Mm-hmm. Peter tells us often to look to Jesus as our example. He suffered, and God glorified him for his obedience and suffering. Mm-hmm. And faith is tested and stretched in moments like this. It's hard to trust a God who could fix it all but doesn't immediately. Mm-hmm. And that's the testing of faith. Can we trust God that even if it gets worse than we thought he would ever let it get, we'll still trust him? Yeah. And that was the lesson of Job, right? Mm-hmm. Do whatever you want, Satan. You can't break this. Mm-hmm. You can't break his faith. And that's a faith, of course, only comes from God. Because I'd botch it.
That's right. Well, anyway, these are the kind of conversations that Joe and I get into as we pass through our days, and whatever the topic of the day happens to be. And of course, the topic of our day is the coronavirus. So we hope you've enjoyed spending a little time listening to us talk. And as we bring our little time to a conclusion, let me just say a couple things to our local church family here about church life at Lewis Lake. First of all, let me mention confirmation. Confirmation Sunday was to have been the first Sunday of May. There's no way that can happen now. And so we're just kind of in a holding pattern. We'll be making plans. We have posted students, if you need to get a couple of sermon notes in, if you're behind on that, I figured it out. You should have 14 sets of sermon notes in by now. That's 2 sermon notes a month, remember. Some of you are quite fine in that. Some of you need to catch up a little bit, and you have the opportunity. You can go to the lewislake.org website and go to the media page, and there will be sermons from the past months, and you can click to play those and just listen to those in an audio way. And then right underneath that play bar is a title of that message. And if you click that, that will help you download the sermon notes that we had in our bulletin. And you can print those out, listen to the sermon, fill out the sermon notes to the best of your ability, and then you can get those to me a little bit later on when we start meeting again. So confirmation students, be working on that, all right? Be working on that. I just had a conversation with John Kramka at their Covenant offices here in the Northwest Conference, and I asked him, are there any Covenant churches that are meeting right now? And he said, no, they're all canceled, and they're all doing online kinds of services now. And so we were to meet on Good Friday with Carmel Covenant Church and have a united service. They've canceled all of their services as well for the month of April, so we won't be doing that. So just to let you know, we're trying to figure out if there's something we can do for Easter being such a special day, and we'll be announcing that once we figure it out, but the council is kind of wrestling through some things with that. So we want you to be aware of that. Ministry is happening. I'm hearing great stories of things that you guys are doing out there. I want to thank you for that. Percy Terpstra, he's in the Eastwood Assisted Living Home, and he's kind of taken on the role of chaplain over there, leading worship services and sharing things and reading scriptures and so forth. So good job, Percy. Maybe a new career for you at the age of 90, whatever it is. Way to be. Encourage you to pray for East Africa. East Africa is starting to deal with the coronavirus as well, but they have a really big problem on top of that, which is a locust plague. The crops are being destroyed there, so please be in prayer for East Africa. And I've been hearing a lot of you have been calling each other and touching base with your groups. Good job on that. Keep doing that. So we're continuing to do what God has called us to do, finding new and fresh ways to do it. May the Lord bless you as you continue to serve and as you continue to think and work your way through the feelings and the truth of all that's happening to us today. Have a wonderful week, and we will catch up with you next time. Goodbye.